She entered Josh's home without permission straight into his basement, crossing every line imaginable. Karen Miller, the HOA president, ruled the neighborhood through fear and technicalities, but this time she pushed too far. What she didn't know was that Josh had a fully licensed bear named Buddy downstairs, and the law was about to turn against her. But just wait until you hear how this suburban standoff took a wild turn and why in the end justice came with fur. Josh Harper had lived in Willow Creek Estates for precisely 43 days, not 42, not 44, 43. He kept count, not because life in the neighborhood was exciting, quite the opposite. Every day followed the same polished rhythm: trimmed hedges, power walkers in matching sun visors, and HOA emails that sounded more like royal decrees than neighborly notices. After 6 years of peace and solitude in a remote Montana cabin, Josh figured he could trade moose sightings for a backyard pool and a functioning delivery service. He figured wrong. That Saturday started like most, hot and quiet, with the kind of stillness that made you suspicious of birds for being too loud. Josh was outside by the pool, shirtless, wearing old cargo shorts and headphones, absently scooping leaves out of the water while listening to a podcast about a man who vanished after arguing with his HOA over mailbox placement. At the time, Josh laughed at the absurdity. Now it hit a little too close to home. He caught the movement in his peripheral vision, a figure inside his house. At first he assumed it was a trick of the light, or maybe the Amazon guy had walked around back again, but no, the shape moved with intention, confident, familiar, in the way someone becomes when they think rules don't apply to them. Josh set down the skimmer and stepped toward the sliding glass door. There she was in his living room, Karen Miller, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. Her reputation had reached him before her footsteps ever did. She was infamous in the neighborhood, a walking rule book with perfectly ironed khakis and the moral flexibility of a small-town villain in a true crime series. She was halfway across the living room before he could open his mouth. "I saw some suspicious activity this week," she said without preamble, eyes sharp behind the oversized sunglasses. "Late night noises, unusual movement. You've been here what, a month and a half, and already there's chatter. HOA reserves the right to conduct random inspections under Section 14.3 of the Community Charter." Josh blinked. That's absolutely not how that works. You can't just But she was already turning the knob to his basement door. She didn't slow down, didn't hesitate. She moved like she belonged there. "Karen," he called out, raising his voice, now panic creeping in around the edges. Too late. Karen had vanished down the stairs, and with her went the last thread of normally in Josh's suburban experiment. Because the thing was, Josh did have something in the basement, not a meth lab, not a secret tunnel or illegal weapons cache, but something warm-blooded, furry, over 800 pounds. Buddy. He had rescued the bear as a cub in Montana after its mother was hit by a car, raised it with permits, training, and more care than most people give their pets. Buddy was a sleepy, mellow, occasionally flatulent companion who preferred cold, dark spaces like a reinforced, legally approved enclosure in a Florida basement, and Karen, in her self-righteous crusade for neighborhood order, had just trespassed directly into his lair. Josh stood frozen for half a second, then ran down the stairs toward the sound of fate unraveling, one horrified HOA shriek at a time. Josh took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering, not from fear for Karen's safety but from dread of what might happen if Buddy got startled. The basement was dim and cold, just the way the bear liked it, a concrete floored space retrofitted into a private sanctuary, thick steel reinforced fencing, 2 locking gates, temperature control, and round-the-clock ventilation. Josh had spent months and no small fortune making sure Buddy's habitat was secure, humane, and fully licensed. It wasn't danger feared, it was misunderstanding. He reached the bottom landing just in time to hear the overhead lights switch, flick, click, buzz. The fluorescent bulbs stuttered once, then came alive, bathing the basement in a pale industrial glow. Josh rounded the corner. Karen was standing frozen at the edge of the enclosure, just 5 feet from the gate, staring into the pen with wide, stunned eyes. Buddy had already begun to stir the bear. A massive cinnamon brown figure of muscle and fluff yawned slowly, the way bears do when woken from the deep, peaceful sleep of a 62 degrees room. He shifted his weight, rolled once, and looked toward the light. His ears twitched. Then came Karen's voice, high, sharp, unfiltered. "What is that thing doing in your house?" Her hand shot to her chest as if trying to shield herself with indignation. She stumbled back 2 steps and hit the wall, knocking over a metal storage shelf that clanged loudly and sent a broom clattering to the floor. Buddy blinked, unimpressed. Josh remained calm, surprisingly so. He walked past the stairs and opened a nearby drawer. From it he pulled a yellow binder, the one he kept prepped for situations exactly like this, though he'd always hoped he'd never need it. He handed it to her. "His name's Buddy. He's a North American brown bear. He's chipped, registered, vet checked, and fully permitted by the state of Florida and the USDA. That binder contains his entire history, care plan, and the legal documentation of his residence here." Karen didn't take the binder. She just stared at it like it might bite her. this is you can't." Her voice cracked, half fury half disbelief. Josh gently nudged the papers closer. "He's safer than most large dogs. Never been outside the enclosure since we moved in, not once." Karen's eyes flicked to the bear, then back to Josh. Her face had lost color and her hand trembled slightly as she pointed. "That is a wild animal. You're putting the entire neighborhood at risk. The board will hear about this. You'll be fined, evicted, removed." Josh shrugged. "And I'll be submitting a report of my own about the part where you entered my home uninvited and descended into my basement without consent." Karen's jaw tightened. She pressed herself against the wall like it might let her disappear through it. "You'll regret this," she hissed as if still clinging to the illusion of control. "You're done here." Then, with all the grace of someone trying not to look like they're running away, Guile very much running away, she bolted up the stairs. Josh stood still for a moment, listening to her retreating footsteps echo above. He turned toward Buddy, who had already curled back into a cozy heap of fur. "Sorry, Bud," Josh murmured. "Didn't mean to interrupt nap time," but he grunted once, then resumed his nap, utterly unfazed. The human drama, after all, wasn't his problem. Not yet. Karen Miller hadn't just lived in Willow Creek Estates, she had ruled it for over a decade. She was more than a neighbor, she was the self-proclaimed guardian of community standards, the ever-watchful eye behind every citation slipped under a windshield, the mysterious force behind anonymous complaints about unauthorized decorative flags or excessively joyful Halloween displays. She wielded WA policy the way a knight wields a sword, except her armor was a perfectly pressed blouse and a clipboard she carried like it could summon the police with a single scribble. Her record impressive if judged by volume alone. A retired couple once received a formal notice because their rose bushes bloomed asymmetrically. A single mom was fined weekly for excessive curbside storage, which turned out to be her son's basketball. And one family, the Hansons, 3 kids, 2 incomes, and 1 innocent trampoline, nearly faced foreclosure because the bright blue safety net was briefly visible from the street. Karen saw herself as the last line of defense between order and chaos, and in her eyes everything was chaos. Children laughing too loudly, grass growing too quickly, lawn chairs that didn't match the house trim behind her ever-present smile was something colder, not cruelty exactly, but a deep-rooted belief that rules were sacred and she was their chosen interpreter. And the strangest part, she never technically broke the rules. She used them, bent them, sharpened them, and aimed them with precision. She knew every clause, every loophole, every inch of the HOA's legally binding bylaws. That's what made her so hard to stop. It wasn't about community, it was about control. And now she had locked her sights on Josh Harper, a quiet new resident with no WA infractions, no visible violations, no social entanglements. On paper he was perfect, which made him suspicious. He didn't come to WA meetings, he didn't join the neighborhood Facebook group, he didn't trim his hedges into sculpted spirals or participate in the seasonal porch decoration contests, and worst of all, his basement had secrets for Karen. That was all it took to declare war. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that this time she'd picked the wrong target, because Josh didn't just have a stack of legal documents or quiet defiance, he had a bear. And in a place like Willow Creek, where passive aggression was currency and lawn care was law, a bear was something they had no rulebook for. Not yet. Josh didn't wait. He'd lived in enough remote towns and dealt with enough bureaucracy to know one thing: you don't let the narrative get away from you, especially when your uninvited house guest is the president of the WA and your housemate is an 850lb bear. So while Karen was upstairs stomping through his living room, no doubt already rehearsing her speech for the next WA meeting, Josh made the call, not to animal control, not to the WA complaint line, to the actual police. "Hi," he said, steady but firm. "A woman entered my home without permission. She's in my basement. I have it on camera." He didn't mention the bear, let them see that part for themselves. 29 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up the street, their presence drawing more attention than Willow Creek Estates had seen since the 4th of July barbecue fire of 2019. Curious neighbors peeked through blinds. One man took out his phone and started filming from behind a hydrangea. The officers approached calmly, but with the kind of posture that said they expected a situation. Karen met them at the door. By then she had composed herself, at least on the surface. She launched into her version of the story with gusto. "He has a wild animal in his basement," she declared, voice rising with each word. "It's a public safety issue. I went to inspect, as is my right. No, and he threatened me." Josh stood silently beside them, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt, he didn't argue. Instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive, security footage timestamped clear as day. Karen opening the door, Karen stepping inside, Karen walking past his kitchen and opening the basement door without knocking, without asking, without hesitation. The officers watched quietly. One of them raised an eyebrow. Josh handed them a folder neatly labeled, tabbed and prepared. "Florida Exotic Animal Ownership Permit, USDA Compliance Report, Recent Veterinary Health Certificate, Proof of Reinforced Enclosure Construction." They read, they asked questions, calm, professional, thorough. Then one officer turned to Karen. "Did you have permission to enter his home?" Ma'am, Karen straightened. I'm the HOA president. That's not the same as having a warrant. There was a pause, long, quiet and heavy. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Josh didn't speak. He didn't need to. The footage and paperwork said more than he ever could. A few minutes later, one officer gently escorted Karen out the door, not in handcuffs, not with headlines, but with something she wasn't used to: consequences. Still, Josh knew better than to celebrate, because Karen Miller was never the type to accept defeat quietly. She wasn't done. She never was. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Karen Miller had gone viral. It started quietly, just a clip uploaded by a neighbor to a local Facebook group. Karen bursting into Josh's house, caught on the door camera. Within hours, that clip made its way to Reddit under the headline, "Ha, Karen breaks into house, meets a bear." Literally, then came the commentary, then came the memes. One showed Karen's frozen expression mid-scream with the caption, "When you realize the homeowner isn't the biggest threat in the house." Another, a side-by-side of Buddy yawning next to a terrified Karen. One of them is licensed, the other isn't. The story hit TikTok, where it was reenacted with sock puppets, then clay animation, then full dramatic readings. By lunchtime, local news stations were knocking on Josh's door. By dinner, Inside Edition had emailed for an interview, and by nightfall, HOA Karen vs. Basement Bear was trending nationwide. Josh had declined most interviews. He didn't want to be a spectacle, and more importantly, he didn't want to drag Buddy into a media circus. Karen, on the other hand, couldn't stay quiet. The day after the video blew up, she held a short press conference on her front lawn, complete with a shaky smartphone tripod and a speech that started with, "I did what I thought was right," and ended with, "The community deserves to feel safe." Then she filed a lawsuit against Josh. The charges: trespass. She claimed he had endangered her, emotional distress, psychological trauma. She even included a complaint about unsanctioned wildlife maintenance. The internet was not kind, but Josh didn't argue online. He didn't post a rebuttal or go live to tell his side. He hired a lawyer. His name was Connor Briggs, mid-30s, ex-Marine, sharp suit, zero flair for drama and zero tolerance for performative power. Connor read Karen's complaint, closed the folder and said, "Let's return the favor." Josh filed a counter-claim: unlawful entry, harassment, reputational harm and HOA overreach. They added video evidence. Permit records a full psychological evaluation for Buddy, courtesy of his vet, stating that the bear showed no signs of aggression or distress. Karen's case began to collapse before the first hearing was even scheduled. Behind every HOA rule she had weaponized for years, she had hidden behind the assumption that no one would fight back. But now she wasn't facing just another resident worried about lawn height regulations. She was facing someone who came from Montana, who knew how to live with wild animals and how to stand his ground. Karen was about to learn a truth she had long avoided: not all rules bend to her will, and sometimes the quietest man on the block has the sharpest claws on his side. It was a clear morning when the court convened. No crowds, no cameras, just a modest civil courtroom with scuffed floors, fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of legal seriousness in the air. For most, it was just another Tuesday. For Karen Miller, it was the day her kingdom began to crumble. She arrived early, pressed blazer, neatly styled hair, a pastel pink cardigan pulled tight across her shoulders like armor, but her expression betrayed her, the kind of brittle confidence that clings to control even as it slips away. Her pantsuit, though crisply ironed, seemed a size too small, as though even the fabric was trying to pull away from the tension coiled beneath. Josh walked in a few minutes later. No entourage, no expression, just jeans, a clean button-down, and a calm presence that stood in sharp contrast to the storm behind the plaintiff's bench. He didn't carry stacks of papers or make dramatic claims. He brought the truth, neatly organized, USB loaded, and already handed to the clerk. When the case was called, Karen rose with practiced poise. Her lawyer, a local litigator with a reputation for flair but little follow-through, launched into an opening statement about emotional instability, community concern, and animal welfare risk. He used the word wild 4 times in the first 2 minutes. Then it was Josh's turn, or rather his attorney's. Connor Briggs stood, adjusted his cuffs, and said only, "Your Honor, we'd like to begin with exhibit of the home security footage. No edits, no commentary, just the facts." The video played silently across the courtroom screen. Karen walking up to the house, Karen opening the door, Karen entering uninvited, Karen going down the stairs, Karen screaming. The judge watched without expression. When it ended, the silence was long enough to make everyone shift in their seats. Connor handed over a folder: Exhibit B, official permits for the animal enclosure, veterinary documentation, and HOA guidelines confirming the absence of any violation. The judge didn't ask many questions. In fact, after reviewing the documents for less than 5 minutes, he set them aside, folded his hands, and turned to Karen's table. The court finds the defendant in full compliance with local and federal regulations regarding exotic animal ownership. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. As for the plaintiff, Mrs. Miller, you entered the defendant's home without consent, without a warrant, and without any legal basis that qualifies as trespassing under Florida statute. Additionally, your actions as HOA president constitute a breach of conduct and abuse of position. There was no dramatic gavel bang, no outburst, no music, just the quiet weight weight of consequence. Your suit is dismissed, the judge concluded, and your position as WA president is hereby revoked effective immediately. Karen's face didn't change, not at first. It was as if she hadn't heard him or refused to. She gathered her belongings in silence. Her lawyer offered a sympathetic look, but she didn't return it, and as she stepped through the courthouse doors into the bright midday sun, a voice rose from across the parking lot. Hey Karen, how's the bear doing? It wasn't mocking, not fully, more like a question the whole neighborhood had been dying to ask. Karen didn't turn, didn't reply. She just kept walking, her heels clicking against the pavement with rigid precision. But in that moment even those carefully placed footsteps couldn't hide the simple truth. The Queen of Willow Creek had fallen, and the court, like the neighborhood, would never look at her the same way again. With Karen gone, something strange happened in Willow Creek Estates. People exhaled. There were no fireworks, no official announcement, no parade, but you could feel it in the air, subtle and unmistakable, like the first breeze after a summer storm. The rigid tension that had gripped the neighborhood for years began to ease, one quiet moment at a time. It started with decorations. Halloween was still 3 weeks away, but plastic skeletons began appearing on porches, fake cobwebs stretched across shrubs. One family put up an inflatable pumpkin that danced in the wind like it had waited years for permission to move. No citations arrived, no anonymous warnings were taped doors. Next came the kids. They took back the sidewalks like explorers returning to an abandoned land. Scooters buzzed past trimmed hedges, sidewalk chalk drawings bloomed across driveways, laughter the kind that used to draw polite reminders about noise hours returned in full. Then the shutters. Mr. Alvarez, a soft-spoken retired teacher known for his perfect lawn and silent battles with Karen, repainted his shutters bright Caribbean blue, not approved shade, them 12 from the WA manual, his blue, the kind that said, "This is my house, my home." No one said a word except one neighbor who gave him a thumbs up as they passed, and then there was Josh. He never asked for recognition, but somehow he became a kind of local myth, the man who stood up to the one person no one else dared to challenge, not just because he had a bear, but because he said no when it mattered. He didn't hold court on his lawn or post inspirational messages online. He still kept to himself most days, but now neighbors waved first. They stopped to chat. Someone even left a thank you card in his mailbox. No name, just a drawing of a bear giving a thumbs up, and Buddy went back to doing what he did best, sleeping. Every so often a low rumble would echo through the floorboards, a snore so deep it rattled the kitchen cabinets and made the neighbor's dog bark. Once confused, it became a kind of charm, a reminder the bear was still their peaceful present, protected. From time to time neighbors would drop by with sealed snack bags, fruit mostly, and ask if they could take a photo outside the basement door. Josh didn't mind as long as they donated a few dollars to the local wildlife rescue fund, a quiet cause he'd supported for years. The bear had brought the town something unexpected, not fear, not division, balance, and in a place once ruled by rules, that was a kind of freedom they hadn't felt in a long time. After the courthouse doors closed behind her, Karen Miller vanished, not dramatically, not literally, but in the quiet, permanent way some people disappear from places they once tried to own. No official announcement, no farewell message, no porch sale, just gone. And with her departure came rumors, the soft drifting kind that passed from lawn to lawn in low voices over trimmed hedges. Some said she moved to a gated condo complex in Jacksonville, a place where the WA meetings were weekly and the bylaws came in laminated binders. Others swore they saw her name on a lawsuit filed against a public library for intentionally disordering the Dewey Decimal System to create confusion. There were no confirmations, no sightings, just whispers and speculation. What's certain is she never came back to Willow Creek, not once, not even for her lifetime community dedication plaque, which now sits slightly crooked in the WA storage shed behind the tennis courts. Her online presence, however, lingered longer than her physical one. A few residents stumbled across a Facebook post in a now defunct neighborhood group that read, "Suburban anarchy is rising. We must fight before our streets fall to chaos. No one is mowing within regulation. No one is listening. We were a civilized people once." It got 2 likes, one from an account suspiciously named KM Justice, the other from someone who later claimed they just felt bad. Her old allies on the WA board drifted off one by one. Some resigned quietly, others joined the block party committee. One took up watercolor painting. The group she once commanded with spreadsheets and citations and color-coded violation maps shrank to 3 members, and they didn't even meet in person. In the end, Karen wasn't a villain in some grand saga. She was a symbol of something that no longer worked, a style of authority built on fear rather than service. And when that authority cracked, it didn't explode, it simply faded. Now in Willow Creek, her name is more cautionary tale than memory, a whispered legend at community potlucks, a punchline in group chats. Some still wonder where she went, some don't, but for most, life moved on, and the streets for the first time in a long while felt like they belonged to the people who lived on them months past, and with them the final traces of the storm faded into memory. The neighborhood had settled into something new, not lawless but freer, more human, the kind of place where people waved first, where sidewalks saw more chalk than citations, and where rules began to feel more like guidelines than weapons. And at the end of Willow Creek's quietest cul-de-sac, Josh Harper made one small addition to his home. It wasn't flashy, no gold plaques or "I stood up to the wall" signs, just a modest fenced and stretch of lawn shaded by oaks with a reinforced gate, a cooling station, and a few boulders arranged in a sun-drenched semicircle. The kids called it bare patio most days. Buddy preferred to stay inside in the cool stillness of his basement sanctuary, but every so often, especially on cloudy afternoons, he'd lumber outside, blink at the world like it owed him nothing, and flop into his favorite spot by the rocks. Josh would join him, lawn chair, cold drink, no phone, no noise, just the slow rhythm of breathing, one human, one bear, and the shared understanding that silence could be its own kind of companionship. He wasn't looking for trouble when he moved to Willow Creek. He wasn't out to change anything, no grand mission, no rebellion. He just wanted peace. Ironically, or maybe poetically, it was a 900-pound bear who gave it to him, not through force, not through fear, but through presence. Buddy became a reminder that strength doesn't always announce itself, and sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to be pushed. One afternoon, a local blogger stopped by for an interview. She was writing a piece on neighborhood dynamics and the strange rise in animal-assisted social harmony. Sitting under the oak trees, notebook in hand, she asked, "If you could sum up everything that happened, what you've learned, in one sentence, what would it be?" Josh thought for a moment. He looked toward the fence where Buddy was sleeping, his head resting on a log, one ear twitching lazily in the breeze. Then he looked at her and smiled. "Don't mess with quiet people," he said. "You never know what they keep in the basement." The blogger laughed, but Josh didn't. He meant every word.